Today I'm joined by Koen and Shantanu. Both have been on the show before and both have experience in building international go-to-market teams for companies like Gong, Personio, LinkedIn, and a few more. Today we will discuss why you should maybe skip your international expansion plans. And now, enjoy.
Yeah, you might have a massive market. Everyone who comes to Europe from an American company says, we need to get France right, and we need to get Germany right? Because UK is step 1, step 2, step 3 is France and Germany. Once you look at France and Germany, you have to really understand regulations are very different. The way consumers react to products which are not local is very different. But also, are we ready for the geography? Do we have the right amount of branding there? Does the marketing message really resonate?
I think the first thought of many founders or CROs is still indeed like, but let's go spread quickly because then we see where it sticks, and there we will put maybe some extra money. The times are different. We don't even companies like ourselves who are really well funded, but we also need to be more cautious on where we spend and how much we can spend. I think regardless if you have a lot of external money, you need to be very cautious on where you can spend, and eventually you need to expand deeper in the market. So you need to have deeper pockets to really be sustainable.
So I'm joined here today by two OGs on the show. I think the only people beating the two of you is like a Jocko and a Kyle and a Chris Walker, I want to say. Other than the two of you, other than those, no one has been more often on this show then. So congrats to the two of you, Shantanu and Koen. I think Shantanu, last time you were on the show, I think you were still with Gong.
I was.
Now you joined Koen's team at Personio.
Yeah.
And the two of you are now teaming up. So really happy to have you on the show.
I was even listening to Shantanu's podcast back in the day, and I was like, it will be such a pleasure working with him. And like a year later, working with him.
It's a small world, all thanks to Tony. There you go.
Yeah. I still have like one quote from you in mind that I actually use sometimes, Shantanu, when someone talks about planning, which the two of you are knee deep into right now, apparently.
We are.
Which is in itself hilarious. But one of your quotes was like, well, when you do planning, it's like climbing Mount Everest. And at first you need to know, where are you? Are you at base camp? Are you somewhere in between? Are you close to the top? And then you need to figure out what tools to use. And, still fantastic stuff. So if anyone is interested, please go back and listen to the episode with Shantanu. But today, we're going to talk about something else. We're going to talk about international expansion. There will be a bunch of examples coming from the team that the two of you are currently working at, which is Personio. So it's really a German darling that is now expanded to many different places in Europe. It's a really awesome story. But at the same time, and I'm just rattling off some logos here, and maybe I'm starting with the more impressive ones. Shantanu, you have been part of Gong and LinkedIn, both basically US teams expanding into Europe. You've been part of that. Then we talked about Personio already. I was part of Brandwatch and Planday, which basically did European expansion. Koen, you also were part of Team Leader. Kind of it's a Benelux darling, I want to say, that expanded across
Belgium,
right?
Not even Belgium.
Oh, there you go. And then this is the Europe to Europe expansion, but we also have some war stories maybe to share from the Europe to US expansion, which I think a lot of people on this podcast are also thinking about, and this specifically from my time at Brandwatch and Falcon. So let's maybe jump into this right away here, Koen. Whenever I think or anyone thinks about international expansion, going to a new market, doing all of that stuff, usually it's always like, oh, this is great, let's totally go for that. What is the thinking mistake you think people are committing when they're just trying to jump into a new geo?
I mean, and I think that's the interesting one, and I can only typically talk from my experience, but hey, we want to expand, and expand on itself, whether it was pre-COVID or pre-AI or now, is let's open up new markets. Because hey, we sell this thing in the Netherlands, so we can sell it in Belgium. We've started in Germany, so why not go to France or to UK? Or hey, we started in the UK, let's go to the US. Or we started in the US and let's go towards UK because we speak the same language. And I think that in our ambitions, which we all have in SaaS, whether you are funded or not, I think the same question counts for founders indeed who are maybe bootstrapped, is okay, we need to expand. so we expand our TAM. I think that's the mistake where a lot of people thinking, do you really need to expand TAM, and how can you expand the TAM, right? So is it TAM, which is the critical factor? So I think for myself, that's like, yeah, one which is obvious, but I think we need to take way more things in consideration before we are growing. And how are we growing? Especially, let's be honest, in the years of 2025 and now moving into 2026. So that to me is a way of thinking which I think needs to be challenged by many. But I don't know how you see this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's always such an easy decision, right? Kind of. And I think in Europe it's almost like a little bit of a different perspective because, you know, if you start out in Belgium, yeah, I mean international expansion is a thing for you from day 2 basically, right? If you start out on Denmark, I mean there's 6 million people live here. You can't run a local play. That doesn't really work out. But then you have teams that are starting out in a German speaking region and maybe going after like the Mittelstand there. So kind of SMB mid-sized businesses. You know, there are plenty of those around there, right? And I think the mistake I sometimes see is that, hey, we're not getting enough inbound. We're calling a lot of people already. Let's just add another region to it, which kind of on the spreadsheet level seems super simple, super straightforward. Especially if you go to the UK or the US, like massive markets. But I also think that, and this is, I guess, what we're also going to discover here today, is you jump over a lot of critical thinking in that approach, right? I'm not sure, before we jump to the next piece here, Shantanu, but
Yeah.
what's your take on this?
I love how you phrased it there, Tony, because if I think about TAM expansion, I think that's almost like a wild goose chase. Sometimes people might go after, depending on which stage you are in the company, because you have a lot of literature written in the world about getting your core right first, right? How do you maximize what you get from your core, and whether it's your core segments, the core markets, the core product. So once you're getting that piece of the puzzle working really well, it's very natural to then think about what's next. And one very interesting framework I'd seen actually looked at 4 different axes, right? Because you can expand, as you rightly said, you can have a geographical expansion to new countries. You should also think about product expansion. Are there adjacent products which require probably similar eventual customer base, which your existing customers might benefit from? So maybe you had product. The third lens could just be segments. You mentioned the Mittelstand and looking at different parts in Germany. If you are an enterprise player versus a small business player versus mid market, where can you really go deeper? And I think that part is one which quite often we miss. And the fourth one is almost even the how you reach out, right? Which is, do you have different channels through which you can go after? And again, Koen and I have been talking a lot about the channel play within our own company right now, but there's a lot to do there. So I would look at maybe more indexes or vertices to look at expansion.
When I talk to CROs and they're kind of trying to make that decision, I want to say that the TAM expansion in terms of region always seems like the easiest one to them. You know what I mean? And because, we've already tried those different channels and we're kind of capped there. And, going to enterprise and SMB, we don't want to do that. And, or adding another product, this product market fit thing, that's kind of scary. Why don't we just translate the whole thing and do it in France? It seems so much easier to everyone, right? And I think this is where sometimes this this problem is probably finding its root, right? But I mean, Shantanu, kind of really asking about this specifically, right? So it's like people know about product market fit. They know about go-to market fit. Especially if they've listened to this show for like 2 episodes or something. But how do you think about this sometimes?
Yeah, I would almost add a third phrasing there, which is almost like a product geo fit, and I'll take that from a more practical lens, right? So if I go back to even when you mentioned I was at Gong, and Gong was pretty much, I think, a massive player and logo in the US soon after it launched. It took a few minutes for people to understand we can actually record calls and hold people accountable to getting intelligence from those conversations. And then back when I joined, we were saying, let's just focus on the UK. And again, to your point, we were trying to find, do we have a geography which is in a way parallel or similar to what it was in the US, similar language, similar challenges, similar. So almost like, okay, we have our product localized to a certain extent, where you kind of get product Geo Fit, if I use that phrase. And then we were very, very methodical about when we would launch and go into other markets outside of the UK within Europe, and then similarly in APAC now. So a large part of my journey there was going through that, and we looked at multiple things around what I might call the ability to win. So you're looking at, yeah, you might have a massive market, and everyone who comes to Europe from an American company says we need to get France right, and we need to get Germany right, because UK is step one, step two, step three is France and Germany. Once you look at France and Germany, you have to really understand regulations are very different. The way consumers react to products which are not local is very different. So there's a different approach, and I think we spend a lot of time making sure not only do we get the basic technicalities, but everything from the product to work, but also are we ready for the geography? Do we have the right amount of branding there? Does the marketing message really resonate? Do you have the right presence? Are you reaching the right influencers, not just within the companies you're trying to, but for the industry as a whole? So that, I think, takes a bit of a very planned and methodical approach, and we went deep into that.
Everyone's talking about AI features, automations, and agentic tools. But here's the truth. Most just create or even amplify silos, and often make RevOps the bottleneck, since they are the only ones with access to all of the AI goodness. Evergrowth is different. It's the only shared go-to-market workspace where RevOps train agents once, and sellers can use them one-to-one, either in Evergrowth or directly inside any CRM, be it HubSpot, Salesforce, or Pipedrive. If you need to automate top funnel research, equip sellers with better fit ICP accounts, and generate research-based outreach that resonates to generate more revenue, visit evergrowth.com. And now, back to the show. This problem from a Gong perspective seems to be, I think in other industries and verticals, you would call it digital maturity related primarily, right? Because I mean, come on, it's a meeting recorder. Come on, how localized does it need to be, right? But flipping this on its
across borders, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But flipping it on its head with Personio, right? Which is you know, both of your current gigs. But maybe Koen, you kind of talk to that a little bit. I mean, this was a predominantly German play in the beginning. They're very quickly into, you know, well, pan-European, I want to say. And it's in the HR space. So HR space is, you know, this is, let's just say, to a degree regulated. There are local laws around that stuff. You can't just do the same thing that you do in Germany, you know, one-to-one in Holland and Netherlands, for example. So what were the considerations there? Kind of talk a little bit about the that product Geo Fit that Personio has to go through or still is undergoing.
Yeah, and again, like I think regardless if you are a Gong and you have maybe a product which you can ship across borders easier than a HR tool or a local compliant tool, I think the first thought of many founders or CROs is still indeed like, but let's go spread quickly, because then we see where it sticks, and there we will put maybe some extra money. But I think so. From I mean, I'm now 3 years at Personio, so also back in the days, I mean, I dare to say that we had a wider spread of focus, which is the right word, but like on the different countries which we thought we could really penetrate deeply in. But I think what we've learned across the years, and let's be honest, that's not only for Personio, that's for all the companies, whether you are funded externally or you're a bootstrap, because I think that's also very important. The times are different. We don't even companies like ourselves who are really well funded. I think we're working with a lot of really experienced and nice investors. But we also need to be more cautious on where we spend and how much we can spend. And I think that's for any company, regardless also for Personio, in 2025, but even more in 2026, super important. Back in the days, Gong or any of the bigger companies, they had the monies to quickly expand and see because it was also allowed to have a higher CAC, right? The cost of acquisition. I think regardless if you have a lot of external money, you need to be very cautious on where you can spend, and eventually you need to expand deeper in the market. So you need to have deeper pockets to really be sustainable. So, but that's more an overall picture, right? So I think also for Personio perspective, and not only for Personio, I see this mainly for a lot of European companies, whether indeed Personio started in Germany, one of my previous companies started in Belgium. So from Belgium, you quickly, and I was among other responsible for our international expansion, we quite quickly, obviously, expanded to Holland, Germany, Spain, France, Italy. But of course, the quickness of expanding requires directly a lot from your local teams, from your central teams. Not only localized, of course, your ads and your content. There's so much more. And mainly, and I think that's also what we forget, we are a product. We are a technology company, right? I mean, we do the go-to-market, but that is to speed up our overall technology product, which we bring to help our customers. I think that's also a really big misunderstanding. And I think what we've learned is indeed those nuances. So we, with Personio, we are in the HR space, but it means as well, I mean, we register all the different mutations from an employee on a monthly basis for our customers. And eventually we have a very important function. Everything what changes on a monthly basis for all the people who are employed at a company, eventually at the end of the month, they want to have a paycheck. So we need to provide that information eventually into a payroll system so it can be payroll process. So we have a very important function. That means as well that indeed, if you are an HR player, you need to be locally really well compliant, but also functionality-wise. So we are able to understand all those local nuances. And I think, Tony, to your point, regardless of you are HR, I think there are many more industries or products which eventually really are really differentiated locally. And it's not that easy to now say, oh, but we have AI, so AI can figure out and we can easily spread all the features into the different companies. I think there lies a big challenge. And also to our point for Personio, we also learned that. So if we really want to penetrate, and also for myself, the last 3 years in the Netherlands and in Benelux, you truly need to understand that local market. And to the fact of geo market fit, maybe our go-to market to go towards a geo like the Benelux is slightly different than how we went to market into Germany. It's slightly different how we think about Spain or how we think about the UK. And I think, yeah, those nuances, not only from a product, but also definitely from elite go-to-market, especially now with cost of acquisition and sustainable growth, super important. And everyone really, regardless of external funding, really need to take that in consideration.
Let me attach there, actually. Kind of, you mentioned the whole cost of acquisition, CAC to LTV, CAC payback. I think a healthy way to think about it, if you give it a name, and let's give it the name Product Geo Fit. It's really healthy to think about this as a typical S-curve, right? In the beginning, it's, you're going to put in the same salaries as you will need to later on, but the impact of this will be very low, right? As for a while, you won't see the return of investment there. And this has to do with many different things, because to a degree, and yes, it will probably be a sped up process, you need to basically go through product market fit and go-to-market fit, in that geography just by yourself, right? And kind of, you already talked about like some of the go-to-market tactics that worked in Germany for Personio. Maybe they didn't work as well in the Benelux or in France or wherever.
To your point, like, and we call it actually, I always like it in our company. Hey, Koen, you are the mini CEO of the Benelux. I actually put that one on my title on LinkedIn, mini CEO. But like to your point, like when we started out, and that's typically for a lot of companies, when you started out a journey, we are now existing for 10 years. 10 years ago, totally different age of SaaS, even of the entire global economy, right? Then we started out 5 years ago in the Benelux. But where the Benelux was 5 years ago, where it is right now, is also significantly changed from them. So also the starting point, if you go abroad, if you internationally expand, it's typically that the first couple of years you're staying in your homeland and then moving towards other geos. At that point in time, the market can be, especially now with AI and everything, significantly changed. Even if you start 2 years ago, you start now expanding internationally, it can be totally different. Like getting back towards Geo Fit.
Let me play the ball to Shantanu here for a second. So from a RevOps perspective, right? What are the top 3 worries you have when someone comes to you and is like, hey Shantanu, let's do the US now, right? I'm just waiting for that announcement that Personio says we figured it out. US is next. Like what is the first 3 things you're gonna do after throwing your laptop against the wall? But like what's gonna happen there?
So first of all, and before, just so your listeners don't get this wrong, we're not announcing anything here. We're definitely not talking about that for Personio right now. Yeah, it's not us to announce that. And but yeah, but if I go into your point there, I think I was thinking of three things which becomes very important, right? And whether it's going into new market, expanding into international, even to be fair, even sustaining what's already investing in international, there's three things which are very important. Number one, just the opportunity cost. We just talked a lot about lifetime value and customer acquisition cost. The moment you think about, okay, how much money do we need to put to get someone in seat there, to be hired, to have actually processes behind it, even things like, do we set up an entity, do we go through an employee of record, which you can now also do through Personio, by the way. But there's so many different options to think about and get that initial setup. Number one. Second, and I think the opportunity cost is, instead of putting into that market, could you have instead gone into your core and really optimized another part? So that's the first question. Second, I think you don't really get economies of scale, and that's the part where everyone has to be aware about. You're investing now not for the short term but the long term. So it has to be, you have to be very, very confident about why you're investing in international markets, and that's a very thoughtful decision to be made. And I'll give you an example. Is let's say you're, and I'm not going to say US. Let's say we're launching in a new market. Let's say Norway, right? I'm just making an example here.
Oh, you're going to Norway now.
Awesome. Just say Denmark, Denmark,
Yeah,
Denmark.
let's do Denmark. You'll be even happier now, Tony. So we're going to Denmark.
Yeah.
And let's say we're going to hire Tony there as an AE. Do we know what the right quotas are? How do we benchmark? Is it based on, because again, like you said, there's so many different variables, right, from the product market fit to the actual customer base. What are the different competitors? What is the overarching framework for everything from external internal factors? So you might have, and again, in the past we've done something like, you might have a 10%, 15% lower target, but again, you have to hire people at an OTE which is con- in line with the market. So when you bring that in, your mechanics don't really sound in comparison to the core market or the mothership, if you want to call it that. The numbers suddenly seem off. So you have to spend a lot of time justifying why that's different. And the third part, and this I'm playing one of, if I just go back to what RevOps is trying to drive across, consistency across systems, processes, and data, there's going to be so many inconsistencies in just building that up, which you have to be okay with. But you need to then prepare people for the fact that, look, now your lead routing used to go XYZ, it'll break. This used to work in a certain way, this will break. So we just then create that. And quite often you're doing that with a sense of conviction that, and again, in this example, let's say we know that Denmark is going to be so big 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line. But building that entire story together is very important to be able to define that.
Let me linger on one of the things you said there for a little bit, which really was um, the cost of the incremental dollar going into this new geo, right? Which is one of the concepts we have used previously to shut down a lot of ideas about going to other geos, by the way. And it's dangerous also. It's like, it's a short term versus long term kind of gamble here. But let's just take this from a maybe a Gong perspective. And I'm not sure how much you can talk or speak to that, but whenever I talk to CROs, founders, CEOs in Europe, and they're thinking about their next market, I don't need to think about it. It's the US. Like, obviously, I'm sorry, that's what you're gonna do, right? Especially if you're venture capital funded. Obviously, there's some caveats. Don't get me wrong, but that's an immediate go there, because, like, yes, the long term story is just so solid. But going from the US to arguably many fractured smaller markets, you must be looking at this whole thing, and sure, it's going to be labeled international, and there's going to be VP international and so forth, but everyone knows it's not the same thing. Yes, maybe UK feels a little bit cozy to the US, but latest Germany, and then definitely France is going to break that picture really quickly, right? So how is a US company even thinking about going international in that context? It almost doesn't make any sense.
Yes, and I think that's a very good point. I think there's two important things to get there. I think number one, you need to have a very strong international lead, right? Just like we now have Koen for Personio. You need to find the right person.
More cool. Like it's
Yeah, but I think it's crazy how important that first leader becomes. I can think of so many examples of companies who've done it right. Similarly, I think Gong had found a very good international leader at that point to kickstart the campaign. But finding the right person, because then that person will be able to understand what the nuances of the markets are, really be able to almost be the eyes and ears for the company in that satellite office, if you want to call it that. And the second part, which becomes very important, and again, I think we did that well at Gong, was um, almost thinking about how do you ramp up investment, right? Which is, we talked about how the mechanics of investment don't look so good on a pure P&L sheet, or a view on what is the actual CAC. But you might be like, this is what we're going to do in the first 6 months. If this bears out, this is what we'll do the next 6 months. Having that entire plan of what are those milestones and leading indicators to get right, because if you don't have that, you don't really have an assessment of what's working. So get the right person and the right metrics planned out in the future.
Moving us a little bit along to, we've been talking a lot about, why it's a bad idea, what the issues are. Let's flip this around and basically help people listening to benefit from our collective scar tissue here, right? Kind of, we've been through the ringer on this a couple of times now. So let's flip to the solution side here just a little bit, and I would want us to break this down probably in like 2-3 different maybe chapters. One is more on the strategic considerations. I think we talked about this already a little bit. Let's dive a little bit deeper into there. So, the C-level folks kind of go about it in the right way. The next one would actually be team and culture and people. It's something that's usually underappreciated, I'm going to say. And then let's spend some good time on the execution, which I think all of us can really much nicely talk to. But Koen, kicking us off here on the strategic consideration side, kind of how are you actually how should people be making the decision to open up a new geo, right? How or market or region, however they want to define it. How would you say should they be going about this?
Yeah, I think also there it always depends like on how fast you want to grow. But I think I've also seen different examples. So I've seen, for instance, in this Belgium company where we were really practical of nature. There also the CEO said, hey, we had just a small budget, which we allocated in directly experimenting from the headquarters into new regions. So quickly what we did there is like we just hired one growth marketeer. We made sure, like very basic. I don't say this is the approach, but like, hey, we just translate the basics. We have the basic set and the domain, and we just hire one growth marketeer. He's sitting in our headquarters, and we start with some advertising. And just to see if it sticks, starts to have the first quality disco demo. That's a very practical approach, which can be consideration. I think there we saw this was a method which could be working, but I think you need to do some proper analysis first, right? You need to really, because you can do this, but like, come on, you need to really understand the dynamics of the market. Like, it sounds weird, but always like this old school SWOT analysis. Like, who is there currently? Who is in the market? What is this ecosystem? What kind of partners are there? Have the first conversation. I think what we do a lot wrong is just assuming let's go to France, Germany, or UK because it's the big markets, or the US. But just really start to understand that market. And you can make a lot of assumptions in your spreadsheet, dear CEO, but why not pick like for a week or 2 weeks, go into that market, have the conversations. And I think to my example as well, when I came in 3 years ago for the Benelux, and for context, we focused first years really in the Netherlands. I went out and went really talking to customers, talking to the partners, and talking to competitors, understanding where they are at. Why are they positioning? What are their struggles? So I think having those quality insights really helps. Next towards, obviously, do your deeper analysis, understanding where the market is, understand what the potential is, understand where you need to focus, and where potentially what you currently have can be a fit for that type of the market. And I think at some point, also at this team leader stage in this company, we really had a thoroughly assessment. So we had, I think it was back in the days, our chief of staff or COO, who really had a team who did deep research, really weeks and months of research to understand, like, hey, does it make sense to really spend $1? But again, I think it's also important to think from context, because some companies, let's say now the AI native companies, they don't have time for this. They need to speed up, right? But if you are a bootstrapped or a seed or a Series E company or founder, please do also really do due diligence and don't, I would almost say, put it on people, but you as a CEO really need to be involved. I think what we typically see, and I think Shantanu, we know, of course, the guys from Trumpet. I mean, we are working with Trumpet, really cool company. They want to, I mean, they already had traction in the US. But what is Nick doing? One of the co-founders, he's moving to Boston. Of course, they did the proper research all along, but typically what you see if you are a CEO, you go from Europe to the US, you are moving to the US. And I have more some feeling that a CEO in a European company actually kind of puts someone else in place to figure this out. No, you should treat it as being, hey, you are the CEO. You need to kind of go in with that mindset of being a CEO for a new region and figure this out. And I think that's more already a practical way of approaching it from a strategic point of view.
I very much love the, almost, I started this out with, it's think about, what are the strategic considerations? And then it's like, it's very much hands-on and experimental. But I think that's actually what it is. It's really getting that first-hand information. For example, the Plan Day folks that, before I joined, when they had made the decision to expand from Denmark to Germany, the two founders went on a 2 weeks spree, going from city to city and talking to, walking to restaurants and talking with them about their struggles, right? I mean, firsthand information. They kind of went there and tried to get as much real life data out of the market as possible in order then to figure out, well, what kind of profile do we need to hire even? Kind of, is there an opportunity? Does this work? And sure, I think when someone says deep research and context, everyone's, there's probably an AI way to kind of do this. And yes, I think it can help you. I think it can get you quite far with some of these things, but it's not going to replace the hard-earned experiences that you kind of get on the ground. They get way deeper into your thinking and into your head to enable you to make better decisions. I totally agree with that. I think one other thing that I want to add before I hand it over to you, Shantanu, if you have something, but one thing that I want to add is also to, view those expansions as a bet.
Yeah.
View those as a bet, and it needs to, you need to be able to not be bankrupt if the bet doesn't turn out in your favor, right? Kind of. So, current team I'm working with, they want to go to the US. It's clear by now. Back then, when I did this, it was like $1 million a year to even get started. Now it's more like $2 million a year to get started. If you cannot afford $2 million to be potentially wasted, you should triple think about doing it. Like, seriously, right?
Yes.
And I also feel there are cheaper markets to do, at least in Europe, to do the expansion, by the way. Kind of, you don't need to spend that much money. But if it is the US, that's what it is, right? And being able to support that bet and not get cold feet immediately after 3 months, 6 months when things aren't turning out that great, that's like a really important piece before you even should be jumping into this.
But to your point, then I go to Shantanu, because actually Shantanu mentioned earlier a very important point. Yes, bets, but you need to have really clear milestones when you're putting the extra dollar on that. Hey, we've hit the first milestone in the time, or maybe okay, we unlock the next level. It's like kind of a Nintendo game, right? Mario game, like we go to the next level, because you need to do this systematic. And I think that's also where it goes wrong. We go towards new countries. We say it's a bet. Yeah, I mean, it can figure out, but maybe not. I mean, say that to the investors. That's not how you're going to play, right? So I think it need to be a systematic play on how you unlock the next level of investments. But I mean, Shantanu knows how. Yeah.
I was surprised. I think it's fine. I like the bet analogy, because if you're a poker player, you only bet a hand when you know what's coming. You obviously you have a couple of cards in your hand. Yeah, you have a couple of cards in your hand, there's a couple of cards on the table, and you're trying to figure out the right permutation combination. So to me, the one thing I would add to what you both said already is, you have potential in the market. You hopefully have enough money to spend, but you do need to look at your, if you want to call it, ability to win, your path to execution. How do you really start ensuring that if you are putting $1 million, $2 million, whatever in there, you're giving yourself the best opportunity to succeed, and you have to bet on your maybe one, two, just focus, very, very focused bet is what I would say is important.
Kind of staying there for a second, right? So I think the next issue Sure, maybe you go to the US or the US goes to Europe. Yes, strategic, all of that makes sense. But then there's usually another component that I feel is overlooked is sometimes the team and the culture component.
Yes.
And Shantanu,
Yes.
and maybe you're the best one to talk about that for a
Yes.
second, because
Yes.
both in Gong and LinkedIn, you were like the link to Europe.
Yes.
And now with Personio, you're still the link to Europe. So tell us a little bit about that, actually, kind of how does the whole
Yes.
culture and team and almost the personal, private component get into this?
It's a good one. So I think, and I think I like the link part, because culture is so important and can often be overlooked, right? Um, I mentioned in the beginning about the first leader is so important. I would almost say the landing team is very important, right? And the reason why I call it that landing team, I'll give you the Gong example. LinkedIn is a little while back, so I won't go into that in that detail. But if I think about the Gong culture, and I think it was important for the way that the brand of being very much with the sales teams that the company is selling to came with the culture there. When Gong hired here, we got our first two AEs from the US. The top performing AEs actually came here with the landing team, and that made such a big difference. And not just AEs, we also had a CSM and SDR. So literally across the core team, there were people who were doing really well in the US. And why that was so important was it ensured that there's two, three things which are almost like the unspoken norms. I know every company has these are our culture and values, but there's so many things you live out which are the unspoken norms of what makes a company succeed. And I think that was really, really, really strong there. So it's
Yeah,
almost like
nice.
transplanting culture from one to the other.
It's actually an interesting one because when I was just thinking back on the days like when we grew quite quickly in Europe, like team leaders, Belgian company, and we had 6 offices, so we had like a quite decentralized strategy. And again, this is just a approach, but we back then I didn't put it on my LinkedIn. Like I was named sales champion. I mean, for the folks who worked at that company, everyone started letting, "Oh, you were a champion." But actually, what we did was was kind of a liaison. So we had like marketing, we had sales, and we had CS. We had 3 international leaders who came from, let's say, the local operations from headquarters, was the Netherlands or Belgium. And we flew through the countries let's say every 2 weeks or so, just to inject like our knowledge, our best practices, the frameworks, of course, always with the cultural nuances. But to your point, how important it is just to keep capturing that culture, because that's also can be a really big danger of, hey, let's just open up a satellite and leave them alone and do their thing. No, they are really part of your company, and otherwise it will never going to work.
Do you have some leadership advice on this, actually? Being, what is you're the head of international? What's your exact title right now, Koen?
Doesn't matter.
I forgot.
I'm
Boss.
It's good.
Mini CEO of international. Wait for the announcement. Wait for the announcement. No, but Koen, I mean, in terms of leadership advice, you're mentioning kind of a couple of different cultures here. Anything that stands out where you say like, hey, don't make this mistake or go rather in this direction?
I mean, now for myself. So I'm 2 months in my new role. The last 3 years I was only in the Benelux. The biggest danger I can do is, let's copy everything. It works in the Netherlands and Belgium, and let's just go to that in the UKI and in Spain. So no, I mean, I think for myself, and that comes back towards a CEO or a company who wants to expand, like, go to that region. To your point, Tony, go there and spend 2 weeks with the people. Start having conversations, understand the nuances, and don't think, I'm going to change everything. No, understand what works and trying to amplify that. Try to that's the only thing you can do. And I think that's also just an example. I just came back from Dublin like 2 weeks ago. I was hoping to meet Shantanu, but he didn't want to meet with me, unfortunately. But we saw each other in Munich. No, but again, I was sat down with the local teams, with the SDR leadership, with the AE leadership, with marketing, with the ICs on the floor. We sat down with customers. We just invited, was not me, it's actually our country manager who out of nothing, he said, like, it's super important. Let's invite the customers. Let's have a dinner so you understand our, in this case, Irish customers. Have those conversations that you understand what's going on. And that goes beyond like, oh, how happy are you? What is your quota attainment? No, it's really to understand the person behind and why you're in that role. So I think that's also for any leader. I think you whether you're a CRO or CEO, you directly want to get into the weeds. No, it's about the really understanding. So that at least for me always worked. I think it's also very important in this, like you said, building the team, understanding the culture, and obviously bringing some of your lessons learned, what you know works, and trying to show them, hey, if you don't know how to go towards the next level, this is what we did here. let's see in something which fits in your way, that we can also try this as an experiment. Because it's always the worst thing as a leader, CRO, CEO, whatever, just to push things like, oh, let's go to this country and we do all the same things. That just doesn't work.
And one thing which I think is and what I caught on to, the one thing which is very unique to international and being in an international leadership role, right, is right now what Koen has to juggle. You have to think about what's happening from a global execution standpoint and trying to balance that part, while you're also trying to make sure, because in an international role, you have almost an entrepreneurial setup within the big company as well, right? If I think about the balance between trying to create the culture of a startup, really drive incubation, while at the same time being able to balance both, that's really really important. And I'll give you an example. Like right now in Personio, um, one of the things which Koen and I have been talking about is how do we think about our overarching partnership strategy. And again, as most companies, we're obviously in B2B SaaS, we work in different ways. One of the things we really work on partnerships. And to be fair, I think international is taking the lead in our partnership strategy. So we're spending a lot of time with Koen and team while also looking at what we can do in the global partnership strategies. That's like really really a very unique role that international
Yeah.
gets to play.
And the only thing I want to add before I go back to Tony, what I found really important when I learned as well, and I think I learned it among others by working with Shantanu and of course our leadership also with Philippe, etc., is like what a regional leader, so let's say myself as now like international regional leader, whatever. I mean, I'm still there for the company, so I'm still there to execute our global centralized strategy. And I think that's also something, even to your point, yes, I need to be entrepreneurial because I need to find different ways of growth because we are, I mean, not the, yeah, I mean, I always call this satellite, but I need to understand that I'm here for the company globally. And then I think that's still what a lot of leaders who are appointed, but we are the regional, where you're new, we're doing things really differently. And I think you need to find there the right balance between, yes,
Yes.
being entrepreneurial, but come on, we have central processes, we have this central company which we are, and we need to, and I need to make sure that I represent that company and not like, and let's be like going all myself with the different local regional leaders. I think that's also a very important nuance to understand.
I think, and maybe just shortly on this. Number one, I think if you go to a new region, you should be hiring a leader also from that region. There's a bunch of things. For example, when we went to the US, hiring in the US works differently. Like every US person you talk to feels like 10x the talent that any European person, but they just interview a lot better, right? And you want to have a US leader to sort out the bullshit, right? But at the same time, and this is what you just mentioned, Koen, which also happened to us actually back then, was there was this, us versus them culture growing. Kind of, we are in the US, we need to, stick together, and it's actually kind of short-term good, long-term toxic, right? And you kind of need to balance this out, and try and kind of nip it in the bud as soon as possible. But I also want to move on, even though I would love to keep talking here, but I want to, keep it to the two of you here. Moving on a little bit more to some more maybe real life examples, right? And Koen, you kind of mentioned it already. You are representing the global company, but also need to filter it down to the local constituents, if if I want to say it like this. And for me, this usually has to do, local leaders always struggle with, they have some kind of different product requirements than the others, and product resources are central. So, you're the small market, bye. And the same might be with other central resources like marketing, for example. Yes, some parts will be distributed, but still, right? How do you balance this split role of you optimizing for the overall company, but also want to make your own reps happy? That how do you balance that?
Yeah, but I think it also comes again back towards the alignment and the understanding, because like first for my role as what I did before in the Benelux, like you even in the Benelux team, I have a new sales team which reported into me, and I have an existing business team reporting to me. The existing business team, from a product perspective, most likely wants different stuff than a new business team, because the new business team doesn't actually know what like the true customers actually really need, because they're selling, like it's different. The first thing what I did in my first 3 years is, hey team, whether you're a new business, whether you're a marketing, whether you're existing business, we need to talk with one voice. We need to really understand, because we can ask a lot, but we also need to be realistic. We won't get everything. We can't deliver everything, because that's lunatic to think. So we need to at least speak at one voice, I think, because then your chances to get what you need is significantly larger. That's on a really regional, in this case, Benelux scale. For what I'm now trying to do when it comes to international for the different regions, is also align there once again. Hey, if we have a true understanding of what we think has the biggest impact, which is for us in this international setup, but we need to understand, does this align? And I have a practical example here, with what maybe our German or Dutch colleagues also need. Because if the closer we align it with their problems, and we have the biggest benefit, we will most likely, it's a way more realistic ask. So I think that again comes back towards, do have a proper understanding as one team, what you need, what will move the biggest needle. And again, any country has its nuances. There is something, for instance, if you look at HR, which Spain needs else than the UK or in the Netherlands. But you need to align us things on the biggest pieces. And for instance, for ourselves, also as Personio, moving more up market, it is one part of the strategy. But then we need to understand, how does this align with DACH, and putting those things more on our request from products, and the more local nuances. Yeah, maybe we need to also make our bets there. So I think, be smart on what do you think realistically you will get. So that's bringing those together, list it, and being smart on your asks. Which is not everyone, because typically, a regional leader, you really want to defend your region and like, oh, I need everything, otherwise you can't perform. No, that's not the way it works. It gets again towards this alignment with global, which is super important.
I think that's the reality of working in international context, right? It is usually, or it has usually to do with, yes, as a leader, you're obviously talking about a global story, and we as a company to be successful. But for the personal destiny for someone on your team, it sometimes means, well, be happy for the rest, but you're going to get screwed over a little bit. And I think this is a difficult situation to manage as a leader, by the way. But maybe kind of look at this from a RevOps perspective, Shantanu, kind of how, have you run into some of those conflicts too? How have you from you, and yet different roles than only RevOps too, right? I mean, you've been a go-to-market leader in your own sake too, right? Kind of, do you have some advice for people on how to navigate that super tight spot?
Yeah, I would say the most important thing when you come to think about international is you have to navigate complexity. And I think that's the one thing which I know everyone talks about. RevOps is all about dealing with ambiguity and making signal from the noise, but when it comes to doing international, and I'll take an example. So now, for instance, when I think international, I have to remember that when I talk to Koen, he's also talking. I have to talk to him about new business, existing business, the account management team, the customer success team. With all of that, quite often when companies create the international piece, you centralize everything into one role. While when I talk to Koen's counterparts on the German team, for example, I would talk to one person only about new business, one person only about customer success, and so on. So that's one piece which you also then have to remember. And again, I've been on both sides of the equation, in the mothership and in the satellite office, if I use that phrase. When you're in the satellite office, you have to actually remind your counterparts quite often about why to include them. And when you're in the mothership, in RevOps, it's important to ensure, oh yeah, did I actually go around and get all the inputs? Maybe I forgot this specific input from international. So that's a very important context to keep in. The second part, and I mentioned complexity, is quite often, because of the fact that international has those nuances we talked about, having very clear path or role for different inputs to come in. And I'm talking about whether we do the annual planning process. That's front in mind right now. Or if you're doing something like, how do you give books? Maybe the number of accounts a rep in your core market versus say an international market should be different, and why. And then again, when is the again milestone for when there'll be some consistency. Just being comfortable, number one, with complexity, and second, some inconsistency, but inconsistency not for the sake of being inconsistent, but with the clarity and a path to when we will get to consistency.
I think this is a good point to also wrap it, actually, Shantanu and Koen. I think we discussed, sure, from a very much high level perspective, CAC to LTV, we discussed some opportunity costs and all of that stuff. But I think when you break it down to execution, really the drag from complexity is starting to rear its head a lot, right? Both from a leadership perspective, from a systems perspective, from a plan, resource distribution, product building, different languages, different cultures. And I think that's hidden complexity. Kind of that's we humans are really shit with, foreseeing how terrible that complexity will be. I think this is probably one of the top reasons why people think just a TAM expansion might actually be the easiest thing to do, right? I want to thank the two of you for spending some time here. For everyone who's listening and wants to hear the two of you talk again, just send me an email and maybe I'll set something up here again. But Koen and Shantanu, thanks a bunch for your time.
Pleasure.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for
Wonderful.
having us.
Let's continue planning.
Cheers.